Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Hustling Sideways podcast. I'm Alan Halas. I'm a music writer.
And I'm Jim Love, and I'm a keynote and motivational speaker. And
And
we
this is
are in the month
episode,
of March. This is
yes,
March. We're here.
yeah.
We've made it. We've made it.
Uh,
It's spring, I think.
it is
Question
spring-ish, question mark. It's second winter here in Milwaukee.
mark.
This is episode 77 of the Hustling Sideways podcast, where we talk about people's passion projects, their businesses, side hustles, all sorts of those things. And Jim, it is March, and that means it's March Madness by
It
the time.
is.
Well, it won't
It
be.
sure is.
It'll be
Yes,
tournament time by the time that this comes out.
it
Big
does.
East tournament
And
time.
that also means that we get like 2 days where it's 70 degrees, and then we get 4 days where it's 20. And we just kind of have to roll with that and pretend like it's normal. And
Yeah,
that's
we
how things work in Wisconsin.
yeah, we did have that already. I enjoyed it. I went out. I should have went to like the beach or something when it was 70 degrees, and then the next day it
Shorts.
was snowing. So
Yeah, I know. It's just amazing. But we're used to it. We're tough guys. We tend to
there
go
is a
coast.
there's a shovel that still sits by my back door just in case, just in case.
The
So
just in case shovel. We got a snowblower this year, and I've used it twice because the minute I bought it, it was just like, oh, we don't, like, and then I'm used to shoveling. So I go
yeah,
out and I'm like, oh, that's right. I have a machine that could help with this. It's a really
honestly,
dichotomy.
so honestly, my dad bought me one as a housewarming gift a few years ago, and I think I've used it maybe 3 times. So when I
Yeah.
use it, I do like my house and the neighbors and the other side, like,
You feel
because I'm like,
empowered by it. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I'm the best neighbor on the block for that one
Right.
time that we actually have to use it.
And then
Anyway,
the other
enough
time
of
is
us
the worst
babbling.
neighbor. So there you go. It's perfect. Yeah.
Enough of us babbling. We have plenty to talk about today. We have a great guest. We have Georgia Leininger. She is the owner of Salus Publishing, as well as a author and a writer herself. So welcome, Georgia, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
That's our
Yeah,
clap track,
absolutely.
Georgia. We can't afford a clap sound, so we just make it by ourselves.
One of these days. Yeah, yeah,
Yay.
It's a shtick
yeah.
thing. It works.
Absolutely.
It's quirky. It's fun.
Georgia, where are you calling in from today?
Northern California. So we are northeast of Sacramento a bit, up in the foothills. So, but I can
Okay.
relate to the snow because we lived in Mount Shasta, which is up really close to the Oregon border. So we lived in snow country for 6 years. And we finally invested in the high quality snowplow or the snow blower in the 5th year. So we had it for one season. One season. Yeah, I think my husband, I think he used it like 2 times. I attempted to use it once and then I was like, never again. It just same. I'm like, I'll shovel. I'll count it as cardio. It's great. And then we moved and we left it with the new home buyer because we're like, here you go, enjoy.
That's
Yeah. Oh wow,
fantastic.
that's a
You
great
know?
gift too. And
Yeah.
if there's an early theme to today's podcast, it's meaningless purchases. It is snow purchases that have lasted us all of maybe
Yes.
Yeah.
2 or 3 uses.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And
Well,
people don't know, like goodness, California gets snow and like
Oh,
gets
yeah.
cold. Like people, I think a lot of people don't realize that. Like it
No.
gets really cold where you live, like where we
It
used to.
does. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because it's up in the mountains. It's like same elevation and all that stuff is like the Northeast. And yeah, and it is one of those where it's like when we first moved up there, we thought, oh, it's not going to be that bad. Snow's fun. And then you go through the first couple winters and you're slipping and sliding and you're all this and it's just like, okay, all right, fine.
Not as
So
fun.
That's what
yeah,
they all say. It's so fun until it's
so
not,
fun.
until it immediately isn't.
Yeah.
Um, so Georgia, give us a little bit about your background. Have you grown up in Northern California and kind of just a little bit of your history, how you got interested in, in books and reading, I'm sure at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I actually live now on the same little ranch that I grew up on. So it's it's a small little ranch up in Northern California. And my mom was a secretary, and so she was big on reading. So, totally made me a book nerd. And of course, internet access and all that kind of, fun stuff wasn't a big thing. So, hey, books, got to, hang out with the cows and, and read. I went to UCLA and studied English literature and classics because I'm a total nerd, and Spanish because I'm bilingual. And then I did some volunteer work in the Galapagos Islands and Ireland and in Mexico, and like for environmental organizations and stuff like that. And then I went and got my master's degree in magazine journalism at the University of Oregon, because evidently like the West Coast is kind of my thing. And so Oregon was great. It was in Eugene, beautiful, very little snow. So it's kind of that perfect, you get the seasons and then you don't have to shovel. And yeah, and so after that, I as far as when it comes to like writing, I'd always wanted to, to write. I loved, kind of storytelling and all of that. So originally I'd thought, with the magazine journalism, like I'll go be a freelancer, National Geographic, and I'll go do that stuff. And it was when I was in the Galapagos and I'm, kind of researching the giant tortoises and all that. All of that was amazing, but my favorite part was sitting on a beach and talking with the local kids, and they wanted to practice English and I'm practicing my Spanish. And my grandfather, who was my namesake, he had been telling me for years, like, kid, maybe you want to be a teacher, like write books, but maybe you want to be a teacher. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be, no, God, no. And so it was after the Galapagos, and then I did a couple internships at magazines like the Sierra Club magazine in San Francisco, stuff like that. And so then I got to, go back to, pop and say, all right, fine. All right, fine. There we go. So I got to go back to school. Right, I'm going to be a teacher. So I went to Sacramento State University and got my teaching credential. And so I started that. And I wrote my first book when I was pregnant with my son. And so it was my first children's book. I wrote it in English and Spanish. And that kind of got me on some of the kind of discovering the world of publishing. And so, you write a book, right? You write the story and you think, oh, this is fantastic. It can't be that hard to publish, right? It can't be that bad. And then it is. And so it's, you attend the conferences and you do the things and you have the agent meetings and you network and you network and you network. And it just, finally it happened. I worked with Mascot Books, which were wonderful in many ways. And so, but with the environmental aspect, I was like, hey, so, I did my thesis on like tree-free papers and like recycled paper. So could we print my book on that? And they're like, oh, that's adorable. No. And so I, was like, oh, but there's like Knapp paper and and I'm trying to say like, oh, there's this and there's this and these printers in Arizona are doing this great stuff. They're like, great, we have a contract, we're set. No. Like, oh, okay. And so I got my, first book published and I was very happy with it, and all that. And then with my second book, I'm like, okay, well, what's a more kind of environmentally friendly thing to do? And so with my second book, which was an early chapter book about my two of my dogs who are escape artists, I was like, okay, well, maybe print on demand. So I worked with the same illustrator that I'd worked before with my first book, Jo Gershman, who was amazing. She was super experienced. She'd already illustrated 40 books before I'd ever met her. Yeah, and so I was lucky enough that she wanted to work with me. And anyway, and so we did the second book together, and worked with Amazon KDP, to do the print on demand. And yet again, I'm like, okay, so what kind of papers do you have? And they're like, we have one. Enjoy one. You get one. And so it's like, oh, okay, all right, fine. So when I had written the third book, and of course years are have passed, and yet again you're learning more and more. And so then, like, my husband, I think, put it best when, especially with I think in so many small businesses, so with so many entrepreneurs, we fight and we fight and we fight to get a seat at the table. And then eventually you kind of have to realize, maybe it's time to build your own table. And so I built my own table. And so I started a publishing company, and with all of our books are on either 100% recycled or tree-free papers. Like that's, I will not work on anything else. And yeah, and so like we worked with international like illustrators, diverse authors. Sorry, and that was my stupid computer. Anyway, and it's been an experience, and it's been great, and yeah. So we're working on our 10th title right now, and yeah, I'm loving it. So yeah.
Very cool. That is something that I think you said it best when you said you build your own table. I think of, the way that we think about business from our sense, not from, I guess, as the publisher kind of standpoint, you're always thinking about like, okay, well, what is this problem I'm trying to solve? What is this end
Right.
goal that I'm trying to meet, right? But you don't think about like, well, okay, what is the means to get to that?
Right.
And I think that's exactly what you did by creating a company and having a cause that you believe in with that. That's
Right.
very cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Was environmental, I mean, you said you picked that up in the Galapagos Islands. What brought you to the Galapagos first?
Oh, excellent question. So, I had started my master's kind of researching, like, I wanted to, like I say, go into magazines, environmental stuff, growing on a ranch, kind of surrounded by people, or not surrounded by animals, not people, it's very few people. And then kind of, the environmental stuff was always kind of big to me. And so when I was doing the master's, I had the very exciting thesis of the history of paper and the use of paper. And so I focused my thesis, which can solve insomnia, I focused on newspapers, their use of paper, magazines, and books. And I think that was kind of a big eye opener in that you never, I don't think a lot of people realize how much waste is involved with paper, right? Like National Geographics, they last forever, right? Isn't that phenomenal? They last forever. They last forever because there's a reason, because of the paper that they use is treated very heavily and protected very heavily, and it will not decomp, it will not break apart. That stuff is indestructible. And
Sure.
there's a reason for that, right? And so whereas like, and in books, you get into book publishing, and in a lot of ways it's extremely wasteful, it is extremely inefficient. Other businesses could look at book publishing and just be like, how can they survive like this? You print 20,000 copies, you sell 7,000 copies, and they're like, well, it's been 2 years, and we'll just chuck the other 13,000, it's fine, moving on, we'll take the hit. And that happens so often. And so doing the research on that, it was just kind of
Yeah.
eye-opening, right? And so
Yeah,
for the
absolutely.
Galapagos, it was there's the Charles Darwin Research Center on one of the main islands there, and they rescue like a variety of wildlife, including the giant tortoises. And so I, like say nerd, read a lot. And so I wanted to go see the giant tortoises. And there's one, Lonesome George, and he was the last of his subspecies. And so I had a connection because my grandfather's name was George. I'm Georgia. I'm like, I got to go
Yeah.
meet George. And so, I think, that kind of brought me there, and it was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And that sort of thing, I think, pushes you down maybe unintentionally kind of pushed you down that path though
For
too, of
sure.
like realizing like, this is what's going on within an industry. And I think
Yep.
that was good because that's a missing link. If you think about like, well, what brought you from like magazine writing, which
Right.
magazines are coming out on a regular, at this point, probably weekly basis or whatever,
Right.
that, incredibly wasteful and throwing
Right.
paper away. But I did not
Yep.
know that they throw away the excess supply like that when there's books that just
Oh,
haven't
for
sold
sure.
after.
Yeah.
So
And
Yeah.
especially now that I've kind of gotten in more into publishing and looking at distribution and working with Amazon and kind of stuff like that, you get even more of the side of it where it's just, I remember I was talking to one potential distributor, and he, kind of gave an example of like, okay, so what will you like, what would, like, just hypothetical, what would you want us to do with our like remainders? And I'm like, well, what do you mean you're going to ship it back to me? Like, they're perfectly good books. He's like, oh, well, here's kind of an example. And he said that he worked with one publisher, and yet again, like I mentioned, so 20,000 copies. And so the deal was, it was a big box store that shall go unnamed. And so the deal was 90 days. So 20,000 copies, spread out among their many locations, 90 days, to sell. Okay.
mhm.
And then they'd kind of, wrap it up at that point. So after 90 days, 7,000 copies sold. I think it might have been like 7,500. So the publisher was like, great, fantastic. You know what? Worth it. Cool. And so, and these distributors kind of like, all right, well, what do you want us to do with the other, 12,500? And so, and the publisher was kind of like, okay, well, this company put their little barcodes on them, right? Those little stickers on the back. He said,
Yeah.
yeah. So they, like, every copy has these little barcodes. All right, well, how much would that take to take the barcodes off? And so the guy, he did the math for his employees to strip off very carefully every barcode off of every book. And the publisher's like, you know what? Yeah, that's not worth it. Just toss them.
Unbelievable. That
12,500 copies is tossed because it was, they didn't think it was cost
Oh,
effective to just pull off the title, not the title, but pull off the little barcode
yeah.
and have it sent back and sell somewhere else or donate or something like that.
yeah. People they just don't think. It's funny, like how
No.
that happens. I can imagine in many industries often.
Oh yeah.
It's like that's. I mean, I'm thinking about at a really low level. I used to volunteer at like a soup kitchen, and when they had too much food for the rest of the night, they couldn't give it away, and
Right.
they couldn't keep it for the next day, so they just threw it out. And I was like,
Right.
oh, like we're solving for poverty here, and then we're throwing off. It was just and I ended up taking a box home. I'm like, it's going to be thrown
Right.
out. Like fair enough, but it's a significant thing, and obviously this is a different level. I'm also curious too, like a lot of your journey sounds like you had to sort of create it and learn a lot. Like, did you
Yeah.
feel like you were learning something every step, or did you have folks
Oh
that
yeah.
were sort of like also in your corner helping you out that are a little bit too, or was a lot of it just you taking it up?
That's a really good, great question. For me, I think, yeah, every step of the way, it's been kind of learning, and sometimes you learn through the mistakes, and sometimes you kind of learn. But like I say, Joe Gershman as the illustrator and having, her having had that experience and that expertise and that wisdom of working with all those different, authors over the years, she was phenomenal in
Mhm.
many ways, especially with my first book,
Yeah.
because as a first time author, right, or as a first time anything, you're so excited that this is happening. It's like, oh, it's finally happening. This is great. And so the publishers sent us the galleys, the proof copy, whatever. And so I'm like, it looks fantastic. And because I'm not looking at any of the details, I'm not looking at the color, the specs, I'm not looking at any of it. I'm like, it's finally here. And so, I sent it to Joe and I'm thinking she's going to sign off on it and oh, it's going to be fantastic. And she gets to be the one to say, okay, the color is off on this page. It's grainy here. The typeset needs to be adjusted here. And so she went through and she was meticulous and she was like a perfectionist in the best way. And she pushed in the best way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and that as a novice never would have done
Yeah.
because I would never I would never have had the confidence to do that because I would have been terrified like oh, they're gonna say no, they're gonna run away. Or I didn't have the eye for that. And I think one of the things as a business owner is kind of you build your team with the
Mhm.
people who have the expertise that you do not. And then you
Absolutely.
learn from them. And so I've learned so much from Joe as far as like she will debate on like three different fonts. And like here, my background is in journalism. And she's like, well, I don't know. I kind of like the R in that one better, but I do like the B in that one better.
Yeah.
I love working with her because it's just after a while you're like, I
You
If
hit a
you,
it's
point
fine.
you for
I
sure
love
where you're
that.
like, just do your thing, do the thing that I
Yeah,
know that you're good at.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like with our
absolutely.
so she has been both my illustrator and then for our last two titles she has been like the layout graphic designer for no the last three titles for other illustrators who are not familiar with Adobe Suite and all that other kind of fun stuff. And so she's
Mhm.
been kind of the graphic like layout guru. And
Yeah.
so and it's wonderful because we're to the point now where the printer will send the proofs directly to her and then she'll look over everything and she'll give kind of her like recommendations and then she'll send it to me because at this point I'm like have her go through it like and then I'll approve at the end. I'll make sure everything like the business side ISBN all that other fun stuff's there. But yeah, I think probably like I say with a lot of businesses you meet the people, you make the mistakes, you build the team, and
Mhm.
then and you trust in that they have your back and that
Mhm.
they want to make quality work too. So
Yeah. And
Sure.
I'm curious because I've had this happen to me too, where to your point, you put yourself around people who are better at other things than you are, right?
right.
Like different thoughts. But did you ever have a moment where you were starting to think like Joe? Like, oh, like she's rubbing off on you in a sense of
Oh
like
yeah.
maybe I am thinking about that. And like what was it? Like I always found that funny of like, gosh, that's definitely something that person would have thought of and they've rubbed off on me in that
Oh, for
way.
sure. And like especially with and it's in sometimes it's in like the little things where
Mhm.
it's like, is that the right green we want for this cover? Is that too lime? Should we go for a cooler cover? I don't know. I mean, we want it to stand out on the shelf, but not be garish. and I'm standing there, in the bookshop, and I'm looking at various greens, and then you realize other people have been walking behind you, like you're just standing there staring at
Everyone's
greens.
looking at you.
Right.
Yeah, right.
You're not picking up anything. You're just like, right. And so, yes, for sure. And so she has rubbed off of me in the best way. And especially I think in one of the best ways, it's the confidence, right? It's
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
it is that ability, and it is that belief. And like I want to put out the best book that we can possibly put out. And so if that means working with the printer, if that means pushing back, if that means, hey, there was a mistake along the way. If it was on our end, I'll own it, and we'll fix it. If it's on their end, you will own it and you will fix it,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and so that has been, huge, because I think in the beginning, like I say, I would have been so excited, like, it's a book, I get to hold it, yay, that
Yeah,
I wouldn't have pushed for quality.
Yeah.
So
for sure. Now, how many titles did it take? I mean, how many published books that you had before you started to create the company? And you said, you know what, this has really got to work our own way. Was this the third book then that you were finally like, okay, I'm gonna have to create the vehicle for this?
so I'd done the first two, and then I'd actually met a couple other authors. One of them is Andy Domick. He's got a series going with us right now that is phenomenal. And it was just he had worked with a very small publisher for his first book, and it was a pretty good experience. And they put out, a good book. We are gonna probably acquire the rights to that one and reprint it. Um, and anyway, and he had this great idea, for a series of children's books, and just wasn't getting a lot of traction. And it was very frustrating, because it was just, as an author of two books, like say working with a publisher and then basically self-publishing, it's so frustrating seeing other people with the great ideas, and other people, who just get either kind of, I don't know, disheartened by the criticism, or by the ignoring, or by, all of that, and then they just let it go. And
Mhm.
so it was, yeah, I had started to write the third book, and like I say, I'd met like Andy, and then another author, Marva Diaz, and she had, some great stories too. And it was just, I think it was kind of that point. It's, kind of the be the change you want to see. These people are
Yeah,
struggling just like I have been. You know, let's, it's time to do it. Like, let's do it.
Mhm.
for
So
sure.
yeah, I think that was kind of
So
the, sometimes you almost have to get mad, right?
You
You get a
do.
little, yeah. And
Yeah,
then
it
it's,
takes that. I'm
yeah,
glad you said that, Georgia, because I do feel like underneath a lot of people that we speak to, there's a level of like, oh, like I just want this
yeah,
to happen, and I
yeah,
think you have to be a little angry about something not being
yep,
there to move forward and combine that with passion and with some determination. But like
yep,
people shouldn't be afraid to get a little upset
right.
if things are not the way you want them to be, then push for it and get mad while doing. Like I always say, like athletes should play mad, like play like
Oh
you're really
yeah,
upset. Don't foul a guy like on purpose, but
yeah,
play like you're annoyed and you should be frustrated because this means a lot to you. So
right,
I love that because I think we lose a little bit, and I know that this Midwest nice that Alan and I have and a lot of other people have. It's like
yeah,
don't be afraid to get a little upset
yeah,
and let that drive you and to a healthy extent certainly, but
yes,
I think it's really critical to have that. So I agree. I totally agree.
yeah,
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 a healthy chip on the shoulder is definitely worth it for sure.
And then eat the
yeah,
chip later because it probably tastes good. It's a good
yeah.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
It's a little salty. It's nice. Yeah.
yeah. There you go. Oh man, wordsmiths. Yes, great work. Okay. So with that too, I'm curious. Like, is there a what was the kind of biggest barrier to entry for you once it becomes a full-fledged business? Because I can assume that going from just being happy to have a book written to
Right.
now having to figure out how to get it into bookstores on
Yep.
shelves and within, your window of your 90 days or whatever you get to sell,
Right.
depending on who you're working with, of course.
Of course.
Like, what was kind of the first thing that was like the oh my god moment when you're actually putting this thing out under your own title or under your own company?
That's another great question. Distribution, especially in book publishing right now. Oh yeah. And so I think hitting that wall, and honestly still kind of working through that is a challenge, because it's like, here, you make this great book, and especially it was my second title, like, a second book. So I walk into Barnes and Noble, and I got my little book in my hand, and I'm like, hey, so can I do a book reading? And they're like, oh, are you in our system? And I'm like, I have an ISBN. Is that what you mean? And they look in the system and they're like, oh, no, I'm sorry. You're not in our system. We can't carry you. And so then you're kind of, like, what the heck is a system? Like, what do you mean? Well, that's
Yeah.
called Ingram. And so Ingram, and then there's Baker and Taylor. And so over the last probably 20 years, there's been a lot of consolidation in book publishing. And so, as with many other industries as well. And so Ingram and Baker and Taylor tend to be kind of the gatekeepers now of
Okay.
if you want, your books, distributed all over the world, well, then it has to be within their system. And then to be in their system, you have to work with the distributors that they kind of approve of, that they work with. And then to do that, well, then it's the whole, they have to review your titles and they have to review your sales. And have you made enough sales to be, up at this point, worthy of their time and their energy, So I think like a lot of, businesses that I, kind of, heard of as well, it's you have to get big enough to be noticed, and then they'll pick you up and make you that much bigger. But until you can get there, they're not going to really notice you. And so I remember like working with bookstores in Sacramento. And so there was one, and it was a rep from like a like book distribution. It wasn't, I think it was throughout California. And anyway, and so of course, and she's like, oh, well, we're having this event, and we're having this event. We would love to kind of include you because like the sustainable, like thing, like that's great. So, you have an iPage, right? I'm like, what's an iPage? And they're like, oh, well, so you were in Ingram, right? And I'm like, no, not yet. Oh, okay, well, and when you have an iPage, let us know. And then just kind of walked off. I'm like,
That's it.
oh.
Yeah.
So I
the
think
next hurdle. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like
right,
a MySpace. I have a MySpace, a Facebook, an iPage. I have all those things.
right, exactly. And so I think it's, yeah, I think that's kind of like a struggle. Like one of our favorite stores that we sell through is a toy store, and they have a little book section. And so the owner there, it's funny, she started her company around the same time that, I started mine. And so we've kind of, commiserated in a lot of ways and, celebrated in others. But she talked one time about a man that she had met in one of like the big toy conferences in Las Vegas. And he had this great idea. It was like 15 years ago for a board game. And I can't remember the name. And so, and it went from great idea to, okay, now how do I create this? Right. And so he and his wife and his kids drew out the first board, and they created their own little, players, and they did all this kind of stuff, and they had their little prototype. And they're like, okay, this is fantastic. Now what? And so, and he was telling her kind of the whole process of as a game creator, like a physical game, what he had to go through in order to, to make enough, like copies, I guess, products of this game, and then to get it out to people, and then to get the funding. So he applied for a loan, and he did this whole thing. And so he had to pay his own way to get into this, this like, toy show and, Vegas. And then after all this hard work, yet again, to, get a seat at the table, to be considered among like all of the other big companies that have, the various monopolies and, and all of that.
Yeah.
And so I think for so many, it's just, you get to one hurdle, you get over it, and then there's the next one, and then there's the next one, and then there's the next
Yeah,
one. It's just the process.
absolutely. I think so the analogy for me in the music world is definitely like record deals back in the day were the end all be all. You could print
Right.
you could get a record made independently, but it was very DIY, and it was whatever money you could scrounge together to get a physical record put together. And you would think that the internet would be like the kind of great equalizer on that with streaming and everything like that, but it also gives everybody the same playing field, and now it's a new hurdle for them of like, well, how do we do things that earn money here, and how do we
Right.
even get into the consideration of radio or whoever else,
Right.
because immediately once you get over one thing, the next challenge definitely comes at you for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
How did you eventually get into that, or do you work mainly with like independent bookstores? Like, how do you kind of go about your distribution now?
So that's still a work in progress. So we work with a lot of independent stores, and then of course, Amazon. And so, we're still kind of,
Mhm.
that's for better and for worse. And of course, like through online sales, like our website and stuff like that. So, yeah. So it's distribution's in the process, right? Like so we just came out with a new title in January. So it's by Cy Swan. So Cy Swan, so he's this guy, he is 87 years old. He is a blacksmith who lives up in Oregon. Yes. And so is a frequent star or guest, person on the YouTube channel Essential Craftsman. And so
Uh,
Essential Craftsman, yeah. So Essential Craftsman, like they do like home builds. They have a bunch of projects like spec houses, stuff like that. So they have Scion because he's a blacksmith and he works with anvils and he makes this incredible stuff, and including cannons because he's made cannons that he will fire bowling balls out of, into the side of hills and
of
there in
course.
Oregon.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I need to meet this
Because
guy.
he's incredible. Like he's amazing. And so with his forge, because like you do, he makes knives. And so a few years back, my husband, like big fan of his channel, and so he was, giving me the oh so wonderful and subtle hints, babe, aren't these knives gorgeous? Like, isn't he made this?
They
Isn't that
look great.
incredible? And so it was like after the third or fourth time, and he swears he didn't do this on purpose. Like you ask him now, and he swears. But I'm like, okay, your birthday's coming up. All right, fine, fine. So I call up and I'm like, all right, I'd love to order a knife. And so and he's, this sweet, sweet guy. And so I talked to his wife, and it turns out, they used to live in Northern California as well. And so, you get to chatting. And so I mentioned, yeah, I've got a book publishing business. And he says, oh, well, I wrote a story like 40 years ago. I'm like, oh, well, that's great. And he's like, yeah, but people thought it was dark. So I just put it in a drawer. I'm like, Cy, it's been sitting in a drawer since like 1984. And he's like,
Hmm.
yeah. I'm like, Cy, would you like me to take a look at it? I mean, I'd be happy to read it. And so he's like, I mean, yeah, I guess if you want to, yeah, I'll send it with a knife. I'm like, great. So, he sends this beautiful knife. My husband loves it. It's great. And he sends the story. And I absolutely loved it. It's a children's story. It's written in rhyme and it's phenomenal. And so it needed a little editing like everything does. And so I call back up Cy and I'm like, hey, how about I become your publisher? And so anyway, so and I worked with an illustrator that we worked with before. Her name is Emma Whaley. She is 11 years old, so it's a child illustrator, and she loved the story too. Anyway, long story short, it's it came out and it's been doing really well through Amazon and our website, and then like through local bookshops. But this is kind of the book that it's like, as I continue to kind of find the right distributor for us, where I'm like, this one could be a success. Like honestly, it's already done
Hmm.
well for us. Like this is the one. All of the others,
Nice.
Andy's books are phenomenal, but come on, like this has got
You
to
want
be
this one.
this is the one.
It's
Come
got a
on.
story. Yeah, it's got a story
Yeah.
behind the
That's
story too. That's
Right.
really
Like he
cool.
already has a following, it's like I mean, people in Finland had just bought his book. He has already that kind of platform in place. He's
Hmm.
such just a genuinely wonderful human being and has accomplished so much already in his life. Like, come on. So,
That's the
yeah.
one. That's
Uh,
awesome. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. When you go about kind of curating and picking stories, because now you are in that place where you can be giving
Yes.
opportunities to people, what do you look for in authors or just in a script or I guess a story
Yeah.
kind of thing? What are you looking for out of a piece?
That is an man, great questions all around. Well done. Um, so I think um as a publisher, it's like if you're going to fight for something, right? And as a publisher, I'm fighting for my titles. It's like I've got to believe in it and I've got to love it. Because if
Hmm.
I'm going to go the rounds and if I'm going to talk it up to a bunch of different people 100 times a day, then I want to believe in this. And it's not just because it's on recycled paper. It's not just because, I need it. or my company did. It's, it's because, and like, I believe in these authors. I believe in these illustrators. I believe in these people. I believe in the work. And so I think it has been difficult. Like the first time I ever actually gave a rejection, like I felt truly guilty. Like I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. Like I'm so sorry. It's just not a good fit, and I'm so sorry. Please don't be mad at me. And and you have to kind of, you got to get over that, because it's not a good fit. It doesn't mean that it's not good work. It doesn't mean that they won't find a great place somewhere else. It's just not a good fit for me. And so whenever I've kind of, had to do like a rejection, I've always tried to kind of keep it as constructive as possible and say, hey, this isn't really a genre that we're working with yet, but there's this other book publisher over here, they really focus on that. Or
Sure.
yet again, it's like, you try to kind of do it with some type of, like, if a story needs a lot of editing, then there are like freelance editors that I've worked with, and it's like, hey, just an info, here's an editor that you might really enjoy kind of working with, who could really help you to really polish this up. And then when you do, the Pacific Northwest Writers Association is a big, kind of conference up here every year, and it's in Seattle. And I mean, there's a ton of different like publishers and agents, and they do workshops. And so I highly recommend people kind of go to that, because that's really an eye-opening, as far as even just working on your pitch, because as
Right.
authors, like with lots of things, you get about, they say 30 seconds, and then people start tuning you out after 10. So, I mean, you really have to work on that pitch and get them hooked.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah. So I would say, like, I have picked projects that, like I say, I believe in the people. I love the story, and I think I can make it work. I think I can do the best job for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't feel that, then there's no point.
Yeah.
So
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And then with that too, I mean, like, not only are you picking people, but you're also probably having to learn about like marketing
yeah.
and sales and finance and things
Yep.
that never really crossed
Yep.
the idea of starting,
Right.
when you wanted to just write a book.
Exactly. And that's another thing. Like social media, I am not big on social media. I'm a rather private person, and so I think like my Instagram account, like my personal one, I think I have like 67 followers, and that's all people I know.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's it. I kind of like the idea of like being an influencer or something like that. To me personally, heck no. But of course, with the business, right, you got to put on different hats. You got
Yeah.
to, like you've got to do it. And so, yeah, and I think, so that's kind of the work in progress too, with marketing and promotion. I love working with independent stores, and I love kind of, hey, talking passionately about these projects that I care about. But when it comes to the events, like the first time I went on TV, and it was like with like Good Day Sacramento. My husband swears I was cool during it, but holy moly, I was a mess. Like I stuttered as a kid, and I swore my stutter was starting to come back, because it was
Sure.
just, it's just a different hat you have to wear. And so I guess like with anything, the more you practice, like the better you get at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many different elements to just not only owning the business, but then now having to be the spokesperson,
Right.
kind of by default, for
Yep.
that sort of
You
thing.
are the face of the brand. That's like
Yes.
Exactly.
responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And and much more the comfort zone is no, I'll be back there. I'll
Right.
be over there.
Don't
No
mind
one
me,
should see
guys.
me. Nope, you're good. Shove somebody else to the front. But see, but it's like publishing in some ways is actually great for that, because it is in many ways the authors. Like Andy Domick, you get him like at a reading, for his books and all that stuff, and kids love him, because his books are funny, and the way he does the voices and the sounds and all that stuff. It's like
Mhm.
that's the part I love. It's getting him in front of like a room full of people, where he can talk about his work and talk about what inspired his stories. And then I get to be the person in the back, and then I get to be like talking to the store owner, like, yes, isn't he amazing? Like, yes, he is. How
That's
many
the one.
copies would you like? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah.
almost like a proud parent kind of thing to be like,
Right.
look, this is this thing I
Yes.
found, and I swear you guys are gonna like it, but you just gotta believe in you
Hmm.
first to end up liking it for sure.
Exactly.
Um, So what is kind of what's on the immediate horizon for you guys? And where do you want to push things from here?
Um, our so far we have been exclusively children's books. And a lot of publishers do tend to stick to one genre, because then you can focus your marketing, you can focus your ads basically on that one shtick, right? And so kind of it goes back to your question of kind of, how do you pick what you pick? Well, we're doing our first kind of young adult book of poetry. And it's because a young woman, she's a co-owner of one of the bookstores in Sacramento. She very nervously, very sweetly one day at one of the events was like, I've written some poetry. Like, would you want to read it sometime? And so I'm like, well, poetry is not really our thing, but yeah, all right, sure. Why not? And you read it and it's gorgeous. It's the first love, it's first unrequited love. And so you read it and you're like, it just pulls on the heartstrings, and it's just, it's the imagery, it's all of it. And so I'm like, oh yeah, let's go. Yep, we're gonna do it. Yep. And
cool.
and so yeah, so what's coming up is our first book of poetry. It's a genre we have not done before, but I'm excited for it. And I can't wait to get her in front of, like audiences and events and things like that, because she's wonderful. And the kind of artist that we chose, it's not technically like illustrated, but it's art from another kind of local artist in Sacramento. And it is a style that I have not worked with before, but it very much vibes with her work. And I think it's going to be great. And so I'm really really excited for it. So it's putting on another hat. It's a different genre. It's going to be more learning, and I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. Very
Awesome.
cool. So, very cool. Well, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more about your titles, more about the things that you're currently working on, I know we just talked about, social media influence and all of that. Where's the best place to connect with Salus Publishing?
Salus Publishing. We're on Facebook, of course. We're on Instagram. We have not joined Threads yet. Like Andy keeps telling me we have to, so we will. Saluspublishing.com, obviously. We have a little YouTube channel where you can watch Andy, read his books and see an interview with me, watch Marva read her books. We're working on getting Cy Swan's video up there too, where he gets to read his own book. So we've got a little YouTube channel, social media, websites. Yeah.
You really are everywhere. That's great.
We're trying.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. And we really do appreciate it. And if you guys are watching or listening for the first time, we appreciate that as well. We are the Hustling Sideways podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us literally everywhere too. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're on X / Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. I said already. We're on all of the things.
We're on everything.
LinkedIn. We are on LinkedIn. Yes,
too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Jim has really been driving the professional aspect of things.
Well done, sir. Well done.
Yeah. We are all over the place. If you do want to be a guest on the show as well, you can send us an email. It's hustlingsideways@gmail.com. And Jim,
keep on hustling.